Hey there, welcome to another week in my studio. Some weeks feel busy, others feel quiet. This one was a bit of both. This week I'm working on a powder blue men's caftan. I had a clear picture in my mind before I even picked up this fabric. I've realized that every garment begins long before the sewing machine is switched on. But sometimes the hardest part isn't making the clothing. It's making all the little decisions that nobody else sees. I always try to imagine the person who eventually wears the piece while I'm making it. Will he feel comfortable? Will he be confident? Will he feel like himself? I think through the whole thing and try to even be the person to an extent. In my years as a fashion designer, I've come to learn that creativity doesn't always arrive with excitement. Sometimes it looks like repetition, sometimes it looks like patience, sometimes it just looks like showing up. And that's what I'm trying to do more of with these vlogs. The sewing machine has become one of the most familiar sounds in my life. Sometimes people call me and they wonder why they can't hear the machine in the background. And it's funny how something so ordinary can still feel comforting. There are days when everything comes together easily while sewing, and there are days when every seam teaches you something new. I've spoken to my designer friends about this sound of the sewing machine, and to many of them, it's therapeutic. But there's also that stillness and quietness that lingers in the background. Most of the magic happens in these quiet moments. Cutting is one of those moments that demands your full and complete attention. When I started Zoharas, I didn't just want to make beautiful clothes. I wanted to create pieces that people could wear for years from now and still feel proud of. Pieces that people could pass on to their grandchildren and their children and children's children, and they could tell stories with those pieces, and the pieces will still matter and still make sense in the fashion of the time it's being passed on. Fashion changes, but good design doesn't have to. The main principle I've realized about menswear is fit, and in most cases simplicity. The two together, coupled with a good fabric, will look classy, elegant, and automatically gives the man who wears the piece confidence. Sometimes confidence comes from wearing something that just simply fits. The cutting and laying of pattern pieces on fabric is a stage that always reminds me that process is really dramatic. It's usually built one pattern at a time, one seam at a time, one stitch at a time. Whenever I'm cutting, if I'm not listening to a podcast or some music, I'm listening to the environment. There are usually crows in the background, or birds, or cars passing by, or even other people chatting on the street. I actually enjoy these quiet moments the most, where I can listen to the environment that I'm working in. I don't look at the deadlines or meetings that I have to attend for these pieces. I'm just creating. I usually think to myself that every garment should ask a question, a different question. I think to myself a lot and I say to myself, should this line be softer? Should this sit higher on him or her? Would removing one detail actually make it stronger? What can I add to elevate this look? What can I take away to make the look more elegant? There's so many questions that run through my mind when I'm just cutting. I've actually stopped chasing perfection. These days I just focus on the intention of the work that I'm putting out into the world. And there's always a difference when I think about creating in that way. So here's a thought from the studio. I think we're all encouraged to move quickly these days. Faster collections, faster trends, faster results. We are just going, moving. But making clothes has taught me that slowing down isn't falling behind. Sometimes slowing down is exactly what allows you to create something worth keeping. I'm thinking that for every vlog, I'm going to have a thought from the studio that I'm just going to throw in there. So here's today's thought from the studio. Let's look more at how fast things are moving and be intentional about slowing down. Someone asked me once what my design philosophy was, and at the time I couldn't really answer because I didn't know what she meant. But now I think through that question, and I think my design philosophy is that I'm drawn to clean lines. I'm drawn, especially for menswear, I'm drawn to clean lines, simple colors. But in my women's wear, I'm drawn more to structure, volume, and color. I love vibrant colors in women's wear. I work with a lot of prints and color and structured fabrics. Simple colors, but there's a lot of volume even in the print. I love that. Small details that quietly do all the work. My goal as a fashion designer has never been to make clothes that simply look good in photos and pictures. I want the designs that I put out into the world to become pieces that people reach for again and again because they feel just as good as they look and they always want to be associated with my designs. I I personally love to design conversation starters. I think I design for the introvert who doesn't know what to say when they walk into a room, but somebody will approach you in my design and the person will start a conversation, and from there they just kick things off. I think that's probably my favorite part of this job, just watching an idea slowly become something real. I think sewing has made me a much more patient person. It's one of the few things where rushing almost always creates more work later. So you're better off taking your time and going through every single process patiently. Some parts of making clothes are exciting, but most of it is actually just repetition. You stitch, you cut the thread, you press, you come back, you stitch, cut the thread, and press. Same process over and over again. And I've realized that it's true of almost everything worth building. You'll even notice it in this vlog, and that's the funny thing. It probably looks the same from one clip to the next, but every seam changes the garment just a little bit. Sometimes progress is almost invisible until you step back and look at the full picture. Sometimes when people walk into my studio and we are discussing a garment for them, they often ask how long something like this takes to create. And the honest answer is it's longer than you would think. Not because sewing is difficult, but because good work asks you to slow down. Good work needs you to take your time. In this day of fast fashion, everybody who gets measured by a tailor or a seamstress wants their garments created yesterday, the day before their measurements were taken. They want things fast and quick. Some people don't even want to come in for a fitting. And that's not the case. We are supposed to take time to create because everything good takes time to build. I used to think confidence came from knowing exactly what I was doing. Now I think it comes from trusting that you will figure it out, no matter how long it takes. Some days I spend more time unpicking stitches than actually sewing. I've stopped seeing that as wasted time. I see it now as progress. Sometimes starting over is part of getting it right. It's always easy to admire the finished piece, but it's much harder to appreciate all the ordinary moments that made that finished piece possible. These days, I think that creativity is less about waiting for inspiration and more about showing up consistently. I don't always sit down and know exactly how something will turn out. Sometimes the process reveals the answer, and not every idea becomes a collection. That's one thing I've taught myself. Not every idea has to be a collection. Not every sketch becomes a garment. But every attempt teaches me something new. Fashion moves quickly these days. Not these days, fashion has always moved quickly. But I don't think people should move as quickly as fashion does. I've never wanted to make clothes that only look good on social media. I want them to become someone's favorite thing to wear. And then they'll show it off on social media. The pieces I remember the most aren't always the loudest. They're the simplest, the wrap dress, the simplest palazzo jumpsuit. And they're the ones that made me feel like myself as the creator. Building a fashion brand is a lot quieter than I imagined. Most days it's just me in my studio, making one decision after another, one mistake after another. But people often celebrate launches rather than these little moments of decision making and wins. Brands are really built on ordinary Tuesdays. Another thing I've tried to teach myself and I ponder over while I work is that we spend so much time trying to arrive somewhere as creatives. We always want to arrive at the perfect business. And even as fashion designers, we want to arrive at the perfect collection. And as people, we want to arrive as the perfect versions of ourselves. But I've started enjoying the becoming just as much as the arrival because it's equally important. I think craftsmanship is really a form of care. It's choosing to do something well, even when no one would notice if you didn't do it well. And the older I get, the more I'm drawn to the simplicities, not because it's easier, but because it leaves room for what really matters. And it's in those rooms of what matters that people notice your creativity as a designer. The studio is a little quieter now than it was this morning. One more piece is finished, one more lesson has been learned. So until next week, keep creating with intention.